Mother's Basement's new video is garbage. I wanna die. And here's why. Roll credits.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
Alright, so this video is going to be different from any other video I've tried to make before because I don't have a script, so everything I'm saying is just going off of either bullet points or just small things that I thought up as I went along. So don't expect it to be 100% accurate at every single point or to be highly specific. So basically I'm breaking every taboo of the internet by making something that's not 100% perfect. So you can go ahead and kill me in the comment section right now. That's perfectly valid. You have every right to do so. It makes perfect sense to me. Alright, great. We got that out of the way with. Let's go. So earlier this week, Jeff Thu of Mother's Basement made a video talking about Infinity War, and it was about what you would expect from Mother's Basement. A 20-minute long video that's mostly a waste of time, spending most of it just repeating things he said earlier, and then a clickbait title and only spending 5 minutes on the actual topic. So yeah, like I said, a Mother's Basement video. And yes, before anyone feels the need to point it out, I'll go ahead and do it so for myself. Yes, I am bringing up the fact that someone made a video that was overly long when it didn't need to, just like Digibro did. So I guess I am about as bad as he is, apparently.
Fuck you. That's the end. Sayonara, Mina-san.
Except the difference is that I made a video complaining about how Digi makes needlessly long videos just like the people he was calling out, and I don't really have enough videos to make that point for myself. So I guess that I'm slightly less of a hypocrite for right now. Moving on, the real point I'm trying to make is that Mother's Basement spent endless amounts of time repeating himself over and over again so it can reach that perfect 20-ish minute mark that so many YouTubers try to look for in their videos to get ad revenue. And this is an incredibly visible thing in the video too. Both at the 2-minute mark and the 6-minute mark, he goes and completely restates something he said earlier. And this eats up about 5 to 7 minutes of the video. And then he does it again at the very end of the video as well.
Firstly, they had to take the lead actors of what amounts to 10 different fully realized film series and make sure that each of the more than 20 principal actors of those films, 19 of whom are big enough to get top billing on the poster, gets a satisfying amount of screen time and character development, all while contributing something meaningful to the overall plot. The film's first and biggest hurdle to overcome is figuring out what to do with all of those main characters. Because depending on how you count it, the film has at least 20 leads and supporting characters, most of whom need to undergo some sort of significant change or growth during the film's events, and all of whom need to help move the plot forward in some significant way. This is a film cast almost entirely with main characters. A film that pays off the progression of 18 other films and even more TV shows, all while working as its own story. Several other storylines during its runtime, all while being told from the perspective of like a dozen different lead characters at once. That was the only way to make this event movie feel like a real event.
10 out of 10 writing, Jeff. 10 out of 10. I also said that the video was clickbait, so I guess I should bring up why I said that as well. The point of the video doesn't even start till the 13-minute mark. And what does he spend doing in the time before that in the video? The first few minutes he gives a kind of review of the movie, and then he spends the rest of that time talking about things like, did you know that we're able to see all the characters in the movie, even though they're not on the screen at the same time?
Heroes and villains alike weave in between the 3 separate storylines of the film seamlessly, allowing the successes and failures in each scene leading up to these climaxes to pay off in all 3 of them.
And that doing this is a new record in the history of film?
The MCU is the biggest, most complicated storytelling endeavor ever undertaken in human history, yet here we are, looking at a screenplay that film schools are going to be teaching and dissecting for years to come. Like, I'm pretty sure that in 50 years' time, film scholars are going to be discussing Infinity War the same way that they now discuss Empire Strikes Back, The Godfather, and other monuments of genre film. But Avengers Infinity War is one of the most brilliant screenplays that I have ever had the pleasure of watching.
Because no movie's ever done that before, have all their characters split up into different locations throughout the film, and use that to tell different parts of the story. Or other incredible features of the movie like, hey, did you notice that when the characters are on different areas in the movie, that you can tell that it's a different area?
It's heavy on black and gray. This fight is very green. The setting of this fight is very orange.
Yeah, I've never seen that in films before. In fact, I remember before seeing this movie, every different set location in a movie looked exactly the same, just like all those $5 stage plays that you see at a local high school, where you just have to pretend the location's different. I'd also like to point out that in reaction to people complaining that Thanos definitely isn't the hero and so the title of his video was clickbait, he posted this picture on Twitter, talking about how the thumbnail used in the video isn't clickbait, because he actually only used the word hero instead of protagonist, because he couldn't fit the word protagonist onto the picture. Except that's not true, because if I remember correctly, he actually had a larger font size for the word protagonist just so it wouldn't fit on the screen. And even still, he could have just used a smaller sized font so the word protagonist would fit on the video anyway. Moving on, let's talk about the real problem with the video. That being him saying that Thanos is the protagonist of the movie. Because of him saying things like, Thanos has the most screen time in the movie. And I'm not even sure if this is entirely true, because when I saw the movie, I felt like most of the characters got about all the same amount of screen time. So unless Jeff went into the theater with like a stopwatch and he's just like, Thanos got 30 seconds here, and Tony Stark only got 15 there, ha, that proves it. Thanos got 40 more frames in this movie than Tony Stark. That makes him the protagonist. 10 out of 10 logic, Jeff. And then his other reasoning being that Thanos went on his own hero's journey, while the other characters didn't quite do this as well, because of simple things like Thor didn't get to enact his justice at the end of the movie, so it's not a simple through line that works cohesively for him being the hero.
At the end of the day, the only character who ever gets to make a meaningful sacrifice for the greater good of the universe in this movie is Thanos himself. And while Thor accomplishes the most out of any of them, he's still not really the protagonist, at least not in terms of story structure.
Actually, there's an interesting case to be made about Thor, so I'll get to that in a bit. But first, I'd like to talk about the hero's journey for a bit. This may seem weird to say, but every hero's story doesn't have to be a hero's journey arc. And to say that that's what makes it a protagonist of your story is kind of silly in itself.
So like all lenses, you need to make sure that you're not using it to view stuff that doesn't fit. Not all stories are hero's journeys, and in some cases, looking at a story through the lens of a hero's journey will obscure your view of the parts of the story that don't easily fall into its categories. Trope responsibly, kids.
Now, I'm lazy, so at this point you've probably seen me start to use some clips. And these clips are from Overly Sarcastic Productions, probably my favorite YouTube channel right now. And the video clips are taken from their video on a hero's journey. A great video, and in fact, if you're still watching this, you should probably go see their channel because you'll learn way more from watching their channel than anything you'll find in a Mother's Basement video. Anyway, it's interesting that Jeff brings up the fact that because you can ascribe the hero's journey to Thanos, that makes him the protagonist. In fact, it's an interesting thing to bring up because every villain thinks they're a hero in their own story. Just look at the past couple of Marvel movies that have come out. Winter Soldier, you have Hydra who thinks that they're trying to do something good for the world, and they're going on their own journey to try to get rid of high-powered, at-risk people that could threaten the government or the world at large. They're trying to maintain order, and they think this is a good thing because they fear the advancement of society in certain ways that they can't predict. Or even in the most recent film, Black Panther, where we get to see this interesting dynamic between T'Challa and Killmonger as they both go on parallel, different, but yet similar heroes' journeys. And we get to see how T'Challa ends up different than Killmonger and why this is what results in him winning at the end. When you put it in this lens, it actually makes Thanos way less interesting of a villain because so many others have also gone on their own similar heroes' journeys, even though they're, once again, not the protagonist of the story. But they also had interesting dynamics and better motivations than Thanos ever did. And I'm not really going to get into why his is flawed. I know another YouTuber, Unknown Otaku, who's doing a video on why it's kind of a stupid plan and how much is wrong with it, so you can just go watch that video. It might be out by the time I make this video. But regardless, let's go and dig a bit deeper into the reasons why Jeff says that Thanos went on a hero's journey to begin with. So Jeff lists 7 things for Thanos to have gone through that makes it a hero's journey. Call to action, refusal of the call, crossing the threshold, goes through ordeal, seizes the sword, journey back, and elixir. The problem with this is most of these barely even fit the definition for the hero's journey. I'll intercut a lot of this with some of those Overly Sarcastic Production clips to help explain it, but yes, there are a bit more to each of those. So the first one, the call to action.
Next, they get the call to adventure, where the hero learns that they might need to do something out of the ordinary in order to save their familiar world.
The call to action that Thanos sees is literally just something he came up with himself, so it's not really like an external world force that's telling him that he should do this. And then we have refusal of the call.
The refusal of the call is where the hero doesn't want to go on an adventure and is narratively punished for this. Typically, their ordinary world is damaged in some way as a result of their refusal to act, so the hero then recognizes that they need to go on the journey, even if it's still semi-reluctant.
Thanos didn't even refuse the call himself, so it still barely even fits there. He's putting it off on his society itself, which is even more interesting, because Thanos actually did want to kill people from the very beginning. From this point onward, Jeff isn't quite that wrong. He does cross the threshold by actually enacting a plan, or actually starting to kill people, but this is hardly crossing a threshold, because he went from a state of something he wanted to do the whole time, and then just started doing it. It wasn't like a big momentous decision. From there, we have goes through ordeal, and this is kind of a weird, interesting word choice for Jeff to use, because goes through ordeal is very loose term, and actually there's so many better uses that he could have chose for parts of the stages of the hero's journey than goes through ordeal, because it's not really that much of a trial. It's more similar to things like woman as temptress or belly of the whale.
This section is usually called the Belly of the Whale, named after that very moment in the story of Jonah. It's where the hero descends into an abyss, or in one way or another goes down, and undergoes a psychological trial during their darkest hour. In the classical Greek and Roman tradition, this part of the story is known as the katabasis, literally going down.
Than it is just going through ordeal. Because unlike going through an ordeal, which is like a trial, something that someone has to go through, woman as temptress more symbolically represents the idea of something that they are reluctant to do that will tell them to try to go back on their journey. Unlike a trial where it's just something that impedes them, it stands in their way, they can't get through it, something that they have to grow and overcome. Whereas woman as trial is a test of resolve. So even from this point, Jeff is kind of even just playing around words. It kind of indicates he doesn't really know too much about the hero's journey to begin with. Since I'm already being a bit of a pedantic jerk and overanalyzing individual words that he used, I might as well go ahead and point out the fact that Jeff's not really using that much of Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces template for the hero's journey, and actually is more similar to Philip Cousineau's version of the story, which only has 8 parts to it rather than the 17 that Campbell has. From there, we have seizes the sword, which is all well and good. Thanos definitely seizes the Soul Stone. You could see this as seizing the sword. And then that he uses Journey Back. And this is interesting because in a lot of heroes' journey stories, the Journeys Back part is actually a multi-stage thing. It's about an actual journey back. It's from after they've learned and gone on this huge ordeal, learning to return to the world that once they knew, now that they are this more complete whole figure, this more godlike being in some senses of the word. Not what Thanos actually does, which is just teleport back to where he wants to be. And from there, you can say that he seized the elixir. He brought back the item that he felt the people needed so he could save the world. But here's the thing. Not only is Jeff just playing really fast and loose with all the terms of the hero's journey, it doesn't even get into the concept of, did Thanos actually go on a journey at all? Because here's the thing, the hero's journey isn't necessarily supposed to be an action of taking through these individual events. It's a journey because it's normally an exploration of the development of a character, the creation of a more complete person. And this isn't really a thing Thanos does throughout the movie, because Thanos stays static from the very beginning of the movie, and from the very first time we see him. He has his end goal in mind, and he never lets anything get in the way. He never changes as a person throughout the developments of the story. The actions that he has to take throughout the story never seem to cause any change with him fundamentally. He's never tried, he never has to actually question anything that he does. It's only a journey in the sense that he went to this place. So many parts of the hero's journey that are supposed to be actions that the character has to go through to develop as a person are met unfulfilled. Take crossing the threshold, for example. Crossing the threshold is normally this idea of they have to step into a new area of existence, a new mindset, a new world. They have to explore a new kind of thinking that they weren't aware of before. This is what makes it normally the crossing the threshold in other stories.
If you're dealing with something like urban fantasy where the natural world is the world of adventure, the first threshold is usually the moment where the hero gains the power to see the more adventurous underside of the ordinary world, or is introduced to the secret world and has the urban fantasy rules explained to them.
Whereas in Infinity War, to say that Thanos is going on a hero's journey, all he's doing is he actually started killing people. The only difference is that he's actually doing what he said he wanted to do from the very beginning. Same goes for ordeals. The reason why heroes have to go through ordeals is because they're supposed to learn from it. This is why in so many stories when you have the return, when they have to go back through the areas where they've gone through trials before, they're supposed to easily pass through these things that used to be struggles for them. Because they've changed. Who they were at the beginning of their journey is different than who they are at the end. This is why in other circular loops of the hero's journey, they become the mentor on the second cycle through. Because they're not the same person. They know the answers. They've lost the weaknesses that they originally had. Thanos doesn't go through any kind of process like this. It's not a journey. And if it is a journey, it's in the loosest sense of the word. So, by any of all of Jeff's logic throughout the video, no, Thanos isn't the protagonist. You just said that because you're trying to be edgy, alright? It's dumb. Now that we're done talking about Mother's Basement, but since we're already on the subject of the hero's journey, I'd really like to start talking though about Thor. Because what happens to Thor in the past 2 movies, Thor Ragnarok and Infinity War, is actually very interesting. Because in a lot of ways, Thor has been going on one really long hero's journey the whole time. And not only that, but it's also very interesting the way that they've been using story pieces from different mythologies to tell this journey. Joseph Campbell's original hero's journey was often based off of his studies of Greek literature, looking at things like the Odyssey or the Iliad. So when talking about Thor, a person who comes from another mythology, though not Greek, him instead being Norse, it adds this extra layer of context for how his stories unravel. Because if you actually back things up all the way to at least Dark World for Thor, you can actually see the starting developments of almost every plot for plot point of Joseph Campbell's original hero's journey. Almost all 17 parts of it, unlike the 7 that Jeff uses for his video. In the very end scenes of Thor Dark World, we get to see him get the call to adventure, which could be seen as him being told by his father to become the king, and then we get to see him refuse the call. From there, we see him inside Age of Ultron, where he gets supernatural aid from Scarlet Witch, who gives him these visions of the future. And from there, we have to see him cross the threshold. He has to go back to his homeworld, where he then journeys into the belly of the whale. He goes with Heimdall to this ancient underground well that's supposed to tell him how he's supposed to save the future. And from there, we see that Thor has been on nothing but a road of trials since then. We hear at the beginning of Ragnarok him talk about how all of the 9 realms are in disarray. Almost all of Thor Ragnarok is in the initiation stage of the hero's journey. Now, from here, it does withdraw a bit from Joseph Campbell's, but it still hits most of the same beats. There is no meeting with Goddess, not in the normal sense of the word. Because meeting with Goddess normally is a gift or an item that's given to the hero to help them on their journey. This doesn't happen in Thor Ragnarok. No, his item's taken away. He loses his hammer. From there, we see a lot of the more of David Adam Lemming's versions of the hero's journey for the initiation stage. He goes and descends into the underworld. He dies in a metaphorical sense. He is thrust out of Valhalla from the earth into this more dead world. He's thrown into this island of forgotten toys. And from there, we see him meet the woman as temptress. You see him meet Valkyrie, who urges him to just stay here instead. He tells Thor that there's no reason to go back to Asgard. It's during this time we also get to see atonement with Father, both for Thor and for Loki, because right before they're cast off into this underworld, we finally see Thor and Loki both reunite with their father and have a talk. And this is an interesting standpoint because it carries throughout the rest of the movie. It's during this time when he's in the underworld that he awakens to more power. He learns to control a bit more of his lightning than he ever could even when he had the hammer. All while going through new struggles and new ways of viewing who his father was. He has to confront both the bad and good things that his father did over the course of his lifetime to grow, and eventually emerge out of the underworld to escape. And then it's during his fight with his sister that he reaches this more apotheosis, the more ultimate boon state, where he finally comes full circle and understands what needs to be done. He understands that he's not just his hammer, and what it means to be a king. And with the final step of the movie being the return process, he has to give up Valhalla. He has to have the one part of the 9 realms destroyed so he can save his people. And this is why Infinity War makes Thor Ragnarok all the more interesting, because Thor Ragnarok ends right where Infinity War begins. And in this way, unlike all the other Avengers movies, Infinity War acts very much like a sequel to the Thor Ragnarok movie, whereas things like Age of Ultron could take place just about anywhere for the most part. From here, Infinity War starts right out with a magical fight. We see both Thor, Loki, and Heimdall, along with the Hulk having to fight off Thanos. And then it ultimately ends with a rescue from without. Heimdall gives himself to rescuing the Hulk, which ultimately buys time for Thanos not to just straight up kill Thor, along with a more literal rescue from without by the Guardians of the Galaxies later in the movie. And from here we get to see even more of David Adam Lemming's versions of the hero's journey, as he has to be resurrected, he has to be reborn, he has to reforge the very thing he was known for, his hammer. He has to reforge a new hammer so he can defeat Thanos, leaving only the last 2 stages of the hero's journey untouched. He doesn't become a master of the 2 worlds, he can't save everyone at the end of the movie, and he doesn't have the freedom to live because he still has to weigh with the guilt of still letting Thanos get away. He doesn't get that final version of apotheosis or atonement at the end of the story. And this is what really makes the movie interesting. Up until this point, Thor has been paying very hard and very close to the idea of the hero's journey. And then it subverts it at the very end. He doesn't get what he wants. He fails, Thanos lives, and even more people died. This is why I'm super excited about the next Avengers movie. Up until now, I've been getting superhero fatigue. And now I have this new branch, this new idea of concepts that are going to come in this next movie. And it's not just how they've been handling the hero's journey that makes it exciting either. Because Thor's also been having a lot of fun homages to lots of different kinds of myths and legends and how they're told in storytelling. In Ragnarok, we got to see this new interesting, more updated take on the story of, like the title says, Ragnarok. Ragnarok being very much a end times kind of story, the destruction of the 9 realms. We get to see Thor's home destroyed at the very end of the movie. And throughout that, we also get to see a lot of things that you would normally expect in other mythological stories. Halfway through Ragnarok, we get to see him teleport to where Doctor Strange is, where he's given advice about where he's supposed to go. Not that different from other mythological stories where people suddenly meet oracles who tell them what they're supposed to do. And then we get to see other things that you would commonly expect to see in other mythologies. We get to see Thor have to reforge himself, being reborn by fire to create his new hammer inside the movie. It's not that different from things like Achilles having to be dipped into the river of Styx, a river of death, to become more powerful. And from there, we even get to see cool things inside Infinity War that are still reminiscent of end times kind of things, like Ragnarok's supposed to be. Although it's still not Norse, we continue to see this end times vibe at the very end of Infinity War, with very much a Christian-like idea of the rapture. People who were there are just suddenly gone. And this is the fun part where I get to make hypothesis about where the film's gonna go in the next movie. You see, because Ragnarok is an end-time story, but unlike Christian things where it's a more linear story, Norse mythology is more of a cyclical nature. Ragnarok is a time of both death, but it also begins a new cycle of rebirth. We know that the people who disappeared at the end of Infinity War, they have to come back. Marvel's just not going to get rid of people like Spider-Man, big name superheroes, just like that. At the end of Ragnarok, everyone from Asgard dies, and right now Thor's the only one left. So this is where we get to make the fun predictions. I think Thor is going to die in the next Infinity War movie. And I think this is going to be done in an attempt to stop Thanos and bring everyone he killed back, finally ending Ragnarok, and yet once again creating a new cycle of rebirth. So taking all of this evidence into consideration, I'd say it makes far more sense to say that Thor's the protagonist of Infinity War, more so than Thanos ever was.